want to thank our sponsor, Vertex Watches, who are a British heritage brand that meets Swiss engineering to create hard-working, functional and reliable watches. They produce a nice selection of timepieces, but my personal favourite is the Monopusher 45 or MP45, that is a direct descendant of watches worn by World War II soldiers who defused unexploded enemy ordnance in 1945. They have two different versions in the MP45 and MP45 Heritage, and they come in either automatic or manual with a 40mm case, superluminova and a sapphire crystal. Pick up yours now and check out their accessories while you're there via vertex-watches.com. Thank you and enjoy. So Nath, when did you become interested in aviation?
So I've been interested in aviation for a very long time, as far as I can remember really, since being a little boy. I think what really spiked my interest was going to air shows with my dad. So I'm from the southwest and we used to go to Yeovilton Air Show and Riyadh as well, and seeing some of the jets do their thing at those shows just really spiked that interest when I was about 10, 11 years old onwards really.
So can you talk us through some of your basic and advanced training when you went to the RAF?
Yeah, so I joined the RAF when I was 18, so I went in straight after my A-levels at college, so I didn't go to university, although I appreciate a lot of people do these days. I went straight in at 18. I joined, and before I did any flying training, I did my officer training at Cranwell, and following that, I did my first bit of flying training, again at RAF Cranwell on the mighty Grob Tutor. So I spent a bit of time, about just over a year on the Grob Tutor, and that's when I got streamed into the world of jets. After my streaming to get selected to go and fly jets, I moved on to the Tucano up at RAF Linton-on-News. Had a great couple of years up at Linton-on-News, really good fun plane to fly, and the training you're doing is just it's a lot of fun as well. And then moved on to the Hawk, and for me that was the Hawk T2, the advanced variant at RAF Valley. Spent again just about a year at RAF Valley doing my flying training, really getting to grips with fast jet operations and learning all there is to learn about flying jets before moving on, for me, to the Tornado, and I was streamed onto the Tornado first.
Did you want to go into the Tornado?
Great question. I get asked that a lot. So ironically, at the time, no. A lot of my mates had gone on to Typhoon, and Typhoon was kind of, the up and coming, or F-35 was over the horizon, and that's where a lot of the interest was. And I was a bit gutted to move on to what I saw at the time as an older aircraft. Turned out to be the best possible thing that could have happened to me, and I've had an incredible time on Tornado. Really enjoyed myself, and I might have been a bit annoyed at the time, but looking back, it was an incredible choice for me to go onto that world.
So what was the role of the GR4 when you joined the force?
So yeah, the role was reasonably varied because it had a lot of different operations all over the world, but it was focused still around ground attack and reconnaissance, and that's very much what the aircraft was designed to do. We'd moved kind of away from the low level kind of operations and more into that kind of medium level space to be able to employ weapons from higher altitudes, but very much still focused on dominating the battleground from an air to ground perspective. Although we did like to dabble in the odd bit of air combat from time to time with some mixed results.
So can you talk us through some of your ground and flying training on the Tornado?
Yeah, so up at RAF Lossiemouth for me, I did all my normal ground school as you'd expect to get to grips with the tech of the aircraft and understand what the aircraft is involved about. And then when it came to actually flying, it was about 6 to 8 months or so up at RAF Lossiemouth, training on the Tornado, obviously getting to grips with having a navigator and the weapon systems operator and how that all works out. And then for me, it was a case of going down to 31 Squadron at Marham once I'd done my training as my first frontline fighter squadron.
Mm-hmm. And how did you find the wing sweep? Did that come naturally, or was it quite a pain?
It was a really cool bit of the Tornado, which I do miss, to be honest. It was incredible. When you pull that lever, the whole jet shudders and shakes as the entire the entire plan form of the aircraft is changing, and then the lift that's involved in that changes over the time as well. So it was quite a physical experience when you used to move it around. It was good and bad. Very cool thing to do, to sweep the wings back, and made the aircraft look amazing. In terms of flying though, a lot more limits and G limits and speed limits to be worried about, and so handling the aircraft became a lot more difficult because you'd have different limits depending on what wing sweep you're in. So that was quite a challenge to learn them all and apply them all respectively. So
what would you say the strengths and weaknesses of the GR4 were?
So absolutely dominant in its field, which was ground attack and reconnaissance. So that was what it focused on for many decades, and over many conflicts it got really good at kind of doing that role. Getting into a combat scenario, understanding the footprint on the ground and delivering weapons as and where it's required. And we trained that to a high level because that's kind of our niche and what we were expected to be very good at. in terms of weaknesses, the aircraft itself, even though it had many upgrades over the years and technologically it had kind of come a long way, it was still an old aircraft, an old airframe, and reasonably underpowered for its time now. So the RB109s, bless them, did a great job back in the day, but certainly as I was flying it, and compared with something like the Typhoon, considering the weight of the Tornado, it's relatively underpowered, and that meant that you would have a lot of issues up at height. So even though I talked earlier about a lot of our weapons being employed from height, once you start to get above 20,000 feet in the Tornado, it did start to struggle quite a bit when you're in a full kind of weapons load with full of fuel, etc. So that kind of performance at higher levels did start to become quite a challenge for us in the Tornado.
Did you fly on live operations?
Yeah, I did a lot of live operations, and that's one of the things that I was blessed with in terms of timing, coming straight from my training unit up at Lossiemouth I talked about earlier, straight into deployed operations. So 2017, 2018, 2019 were particularly busy years for me, out doing Operation Shader in the Middle East, where I got involved in lots of operations over that time, and it was a very busy time for the Tornado Force.
So do you have any memorable stories from your time on the Tornado?
A lot of memorable stories, good and bad, for sure. I think some of the more amusing stories that I could probably share are times where I've been absolutely terrified that something really bad was happening with the Tornado. It turns out nothing bad was happening at all. So a good example of that would be water ingress into the cockpit. So a particular sortie springs to mind. It was an evening sortie out in Cyprus, and for whatever reason a bigger thunderstorm had moved through that afternoon, and a lot of rain had entered the canopy, which unfortunately had been left up. It wasn't sealed with the normal sealing stuff that we'd expect. As a result, water got into the engine control panel and all the switches, and the guys had done their best to clean it all away, but obviously were unaware of a lot of the water that had come down below. I obviously strapped in, go in about a couple of hours later, and as we took off, I had a right-hand TBT, and all the indications, basically the right-hand engine was flaming out. All the engine gauges were spiking up beyond their normal operating temperatures, and it looked to me like the engines were winding down, and I was having at least one, if not a double engine failure on takeoff, which was kind of the worst case scenario. And again, it wasn't during the roll, so I couldn't abort. It was just post rotate, so I was committed to getting airborne at that point, and all the indications and all the warning panel were lighting up as if we'd had a full double engine failure. It took a couple of seconds to reassess, and we managed to limp airborne and just about get away. I didn't immediately shut down the engine because I could still feel there was a fair bit of residual thrust, and we managed to get the aircraft out over the sea and position kind of wide downwind past the cliffs just to the south of Cyprus, just to kind of work out what was going on. We realised that actually, even though the indications were telling us something was very seriously wrong with the aircraft, it certainly felt like we were okay and that we could continue flying the aircraft. So after a very short sort of 30, 45 seconds or so, me and my weapon system operator decided that we obviously were going to put the aircraft back on the ground again as soon as possible, because we weren't really sure what was going on, and we turned downwind and managed to get back on the deck a few minutes later. What transpired is that the water I aforementioned had got into the engine control panel and had put the aircraft into an engine test state, where it was going through its full test basically to check the TBT was in a serviceable condition, which is the turbine gas temperature basically at the back end of the aircraft. So the aircraft was basically thought it was in like an engine test mode while it was flying, which was giving me all these spurious captions. Thankfully, despite sounding quite excited on the radio, we didn't actually shut the aircraft down, and when we landed, I got a fair bit of banter later from the engineers saying, "There's only a bit of water, mate, it's fine." And I was saying, at the time it did not feel fine for sure. So that's one of the more dramatic stories. And then in terms of the more just personal achievement stories, just flying the last few missions on Tornado was an incredible achievement, and being the last guy to get trained up through the training system, and then taking the jets after their last combat mission back from Cyprus to the UK was an incredible experience. And I also had the honour of doing the finale fly past, so the 3-ship that went around all the different air bases that Tornado was affiliated with over the years. Being part of that, despite my kind of junior stature at the time, was just an awesome privilege to be part of. So yeah, lots of good memories.
And then you got posted to Typhoon. Was this your choice?
Not really. I wanted Typhoon, as in that was always my plan. The Air Force kind of sends you where they need you or want you. So if I was re-rolled into F-35 at that time, that would be a kind of decision for them. My preference was to go Typhoon, and actually got Typhoon, which is what I wanted. So that all works out well in the end. But it's very much up to the Air Force to decide where you're best placed really at that time.
So what was the role of the Typhoon with the RAF?
So yeah, the Typhoon very varied now. Again, I talked earlier about Tornado doing quite a lot in terms of different ground ops and ground attack and reconnaissance. The Typhoon does all that and then a lot more. So all the air policing, defensive combat air, QRA, there's absolutely loads of different disciplines that we find ourselves in these days. So very much a multi-role aircraft, which means that we need to kind of spread our disciplines across lots of different kind of skill sets as a pilot, which makes life quite challenging.
So going through flying training, was it difficult going single seat? Obviously, you had a nav back in the Tornado days.
Yeah, it's different, that's for sure. It's funny flying with a nav or a Wizzo. There's good bits and bad bits, and if you found a Wizzo that you got on with really well, a good mate of yours, and you're kind of in sync with each other, then the sum is better than the two parts in the sense that you're both on the same wavelength. And I go for a radio signal chain or frequency change, it's already there, and we're kind of complementing each other in the way we work. That kind of crew resource management. Conversely, if you have someone that you're just not quite on the same wavelength with, for whatever reason, you just operate as humans slightly differently, you'd end up stepping on each other and doing each other's jobs, and that was a nightmare. So I'd go to change the frequency, they'd just change at the same time as me, and then we'd change back and forth 3 or 4 times, and at those times you're better off saying, mate, just leave it to me, I'll do it, or you just get on with it in the back and I'll leave it. And it was very challenging sometimes to integrate. The nice thing about being on your own is that you're your own master, your own destiny, you're very much your own boss, so you know what you have and haven't done, and you work that workload in the cockpit as you need to. You don't have to worry about the fact there's another human there. Conversely, on the single seat side, there are times when I would absolutely love to have another pair of eyes or someone with me, so particularly during some of the operational sorties where you're making some very high-end tariff decisions on your own in a cockpit. But actually, it's nice just to have someone in the back seat to be like, hey mate, is this legit? Are you happy what we're about to go and do? And you can physically talk about it person to person, as opposed to over the radio where it becomes a bit more constrained. So there are definitely pros and cons to having someone else there along for the ride, but I definitely on balance do quite like the single seat side of the house now for sure.
Yeah. So the role, is it 50-50 air to air and then obviously air to ground, or do you train for one role more than the other?
It varies depending on what we're doing in the world at the moment and where we're kind of based and what missions you're going on. So if a squadron is deploying out to the Middle East, they might want to do certain missions, where if they're deploying out to do a big air exercise in America, they might want to focus on one of the missions. So it depends entirely on what that squadron is being asked to do. I would say overall we're more focused on the air-to-air stuff in terms of the platform and what it can achieve versus the air-to-ground, but we still need to be good at all those different skill sets, so it's quite a challenge to keep on top of it all.
So what are the strengths and weaknesses of the Typhoon?
So strengths, I'd definitely say, and again, I'm sure we'll talk about the display in just a second in terms of the performance, and the display does a really good job of hopefully demonstrating that. The jet is an incredibly powerful jet. The engines and the thrust-to-weight ratio and the way it's designed, it absolutely eats up there. It really does accelerate and it gets you into some really impressive places very quickly. So performance of the aircraft and the handling of the aircraft as well. The aircraft again has got carefree handling, so up to +9, -3G, but the nice thing as a pilot, whereas I talked earlier about the wing sweeps on Tornado with different G limits and speed limits and having to really learn those and adhere to those, the Typhoon is very different. I can't break the jet in that respect, so I can pull full back stick, roll as aggressively as I need to, left, right, up, down, and the aircraft will take whatever input I make through the computer system and apply the maximum possible output at that given time, but it will never exceed its own limits. And that means that in a combat scenario, I can roll in behind a hostile and concentrate on looking over my shoulder at the hostile and pull full back stick and aggressively go after that hostile without having to look back to the heads up display or check my parameters, check my speed or check my G. I can just do what I need to do and the aircraft will respond. So that, coupled with the performance, means it's a really potent dogfighter. It's a very good aircraft in that kind of one-to-one environment. I would say weaknesses wise, we're definitely falling behind a bit now in terms of the radar. So we still have a mech scan radar, which is obviously old technology now compared with an active electronically scanned array. So in terms of my wish list for Christmas, I would definitely say a new radar for Typhoon is desperately overdue, and that would really bring us back up to speed with a lot of our peers.
And I have to ask, have you conducted much DACT in the Typhoon?
I have, yeah. Probably not as much as I'd like, because it's a really cool skill set that we don't get to practice very often. But I've actually deployed out to Spain quite a few times on the TLP, Tactical Leadership Programme, where we've gone out to support the course, but also do some student flying in the morning wave as well. And those have provided us some really good opportunities to fight some of the other countries' aircraft. So I fought personally Mirage, Rafale, and F18, which was really cool. And again, each of those platforms brings a little bit different to the dogfight, and we have some strengths and weaknesses, and they have strengths and weaknesses, and training with them is a really cool experience because you do get quite used to just Typhoon on Typhoon, and it's great fun, but you never quite realise how much of a monster you're sitting in until you go up against something else and you realise, wow, this thing really does get around the corner very quickly. Conversely, a Typhoon will never do some of the high alpha manoeuvring stuff that an F18 can do, and the first time an F18 goes high alpha and nose points you from across the circle, it's quite a scary sight because you realise you're getting threatened a lot sooner than you're used to in a Typhoon. So every aircraft has kind of pros and cons, and it's really good with the DACT to expose them.
I have to ask, what was the outcome with the Rafale?
I can say that I did beat the Rafale for sure. The Rafale pilot, bless him, will absolutely maintain the fact that he was in a 3-bag fit, so he was a heavier aircraft than me, and he had some kind of issue apparently with this aircraft that meant that he was a little bit limited in what he can do. That being said, we had a good scrap, and yeah, definitely came out on top in that one.
Yeah. So what was your first squadron, and did you fly it on live ops?
So I went over to 3 Squadron in 2019, just after my flying training on the OCU, and again did a fair few live ops. I went back to Shawyer, so I'm back out to the Middle East and do some operations with those guys, but also did a lot of the Baltic air policing as well. So a lot of the stuff over Eastern Europe, based out of kind of where I was at the time, Romania, in that countries as well, Latvia, Lithuania, all those sort of places. We're doing quite a lot of kind of Eastern Century stuff, so operating up against the border, which was really interesting to see from that air-to-air mindset rather than just air-to-surface. So yeah, I did quite a lot out there.
So after 3 Squadron, did you come to 29 as an instructor? Yeah,
so generally to be an instructor, you need to have done a bit of frontline time, you need to have proven yourself capable of obviously teaching the next generation and be suitable for the role. So post-selection for the instructional side of the house, you come to 29, you do an instructional workup. It's normally about 6 months or so in terms of training you up, not just flying instruction, but also just how to instruct and teach, because that's a new discipline a lot of us haven't really gone through before. So just physically teaching someone a new skill set is a skill all in itself. So going through that training was really interesting, and then jumping into the jet to get spun up on how we teach the new guys and girls how to fly. So yeah, that was a really good time for me actually, just to learn how to teach, because that was a lot of fun, and I still enjoy that to this day. And that's what I do now in terms of instructing on the squadron, is teaching them how to fly and fight Typhoon.
So how did the Typhoon display slot come about?
Yeah, so I'd had my eye on it for a while as very much an aspirational thing, because I didn't really think I was potentially able to do it or had the ability to do it. So it was something that I'd always respected and thought, wow, that looks incredible, but I don't think I'd probably have the crack at that. When I realised I was then coming to 29 Squadron, that kind of narrows my focus a bit, because to be the display pilot, you need to be an instructor on the squadron first. So that kind of straight away put me in the bracket as a potential applicant. And then it wasn't really until I saw some of my mates getting the job that I was like, okay, all right, Brighty, sweet, Turbo, these are good mates of mine. These are guys that I have flown with before during flying training and during missions on Typhoon. So I thought if they could crack it, you know, maybe who knows, maybe I could crack it, and started really doubling down in sort of 2022, 2023 to make myself as competitive as possible for the selection. And we now do the selection a year in advance, so you shadow the previous display pilot, and that was really good because it means that I actually got selected right at the end of 2023, which meant that I spent 2024 shadowing Turbo, which was great.
Is there a lot of requirements? Do you have to have like a live ops like tour, or like how does that work?
Yeah, so they do a scrutiny of your kind of career to date as part of the selection day. So you do a flying test and a sim program, but we have what's called an F5000, which is basically a flying record, all the kind of record of service for your time in the Air Force so far, and that gets scrutinised to make sure that not only are you kind of the right person for the job in terms of physically how you come across, but also in terms of your hours and your achievements thus far, and in keeping with someone, and to be nominated for the display and to get the display, you also need to be known as what's called above average in the air as well. So you need to get that kind of qualification before you apply.
So there's a lot of competition for the position?
Yeah, there's actually quite a small pool, because you need to be an instructor on 29, and there's not as many instructors as we used to have. So there's only about a dozen or so of us now that are kind of eligible to go for the role. And then out of those, I'd say if we're lucky, about 3 to 4 a year kind of apply and go through the selection process. So within those 3 or 4, it's intensely competitive because everyone's very driven and they want to do a great job and put themselves across in the best light. But in terms of the wider pool, well, there's not many of us now in terms of Typhoon instructors, so the pool's not as big as it used to be.
I thought every pilot would want to go for that role.
Yeah, most of them do. Obviously, you need to be an instructor first, and that limits quite a few people. But there's quite a lot of people on the squadron that, yeah, for whatever reason, are not interested. Maybe they're interested in the flying side of the house because you do some incredible things with the jet, but maybe not so interested in maybe the media side, or there's other facets to the role, not just the flying. So it's a kind of package for that year that the guys and girls need to be aware of when they apply.
So can you talk us through the process of starting to create your display?
Yeah, so the beauty with Typhoon display is that I'm very much trusted to design my own sequence and get on with myself. And again, that's another real plus point about being selected a year in advance, is that I could shadow turbo and see what I like and what I don't like, and look at other jet displays as well from all over the year, and particularly places like Riyadh where a lot of the jets come together. And you can look at it and go, oh, I quite like that, or nah, that doesn't really work for me, I don't really want to do that. So you have a good think about it a year in advance, and you can jump in the sim and basically do a bit of free play in your own time and just throw the jet around and see what works. We're very blessed in the Typhoon world to have a really good simulator. Graphically it might not be incredibly amazing, but in terms of the flight model it's 100%, so we can throw the jet around as much as we want in the sim and know that the aircraft will emulate that perfectly. And that means that during that shadowing year you can kind of come up with your own kind of ideas and think, oh, this will look good, this won't look good. Ultimately, as much, throwing the jet around as much as you want in the sim, it all does boil down to then being approved by a supervisor as part of the workup, which I'll talk about in a second. But in terms of the sequence design, you're very much given a blank slate to go with. The final thing I'll say on that is that you do have 3 or 4 manoeuvres that, again, you'd kind of be a fool not to include. So everyone likes that kind of high alpha pass where you're really slowly moving towards the crowd line, or that really high speed pass at 100 feet down the crowd line. I think you'd be a fool not to put those in, and then really your job is to kind of sequence the rest of the manoeuvres around that and make it as appealing and ultimately safe as possible for the public to enjoy.
So obviously you shadowed turbo. Do you go every show?
No, so again, you're very much still an instructor during that time, so your priority is still teaching students and doing flying training. It just so happens that you can select a few weekends to go away with Turbo and the kind of shadowing behind the scenes and see the kind of stuff that he got involved with. So for me, I can't remember the exact shows. I definitely went to Riyadh last year. I went to one of the internationals as well, and also one of the Prestwick as well, because it was over the water. So some different considerations for those kind of display areas. So a bit of a spectrum of different display areas, but yeah, unfortunately not everyone, just 2 or 3.
So when you're creating the display, do you show it to Turbo, or does he give you advice as well?
So he's very much in the mentoring role, so I'm now mentoring next year's pilot who we've already selected, who's going through their workup shortly. I'll mentor them and help them and give them advice. Ultimately it's their year, so it's kind of up to them what they want to do. We have a supervisory structure, so I will do some form of supervision next year to help out with next year's pilot. And we also have Mr. Ryan Lawton, who's left the Air Force. He now works with BAE, but he was the 2017 Typhoon display pilot, and he obviously brings a lot to the party in terms of supervision. He's seen a lot of it before. So between me, the boss, and Ryan, because the boss gets to say as well clearly, we will all supervise the pilot's workup and make sure ultimately what they're doing is safe and exciting and ready for the year. So there is a supervisory chain in place for that.
So did you ever have a manoeuvre like you thought was great, but then you were like, nah, it's not happening?
Plenty, yeah. So both in terms of my own aspirations, kind of wearing my talent at various points during the early part of the season, where I thought, oh, I could do this, and then tried it again and again in the sim, and it didn't really work. And that's the other thing, when you're designing the display, you've got to knock this out every week, to a high standard. So you don't want to do something ridiculously crazy and particularly difficult, because you won't nail it every time, and that causes issues. So you want a relatively simple routine. The other side of that is, yeah, there was one particular manoeuvre I did, and I'm sure a lot of the guys at the fence line would probably have noticed it quite early on, with slowing the jet down towards the crowd and also getting the landing gear down, the gear down at some point, and they did a bit further analysis on that, and that's something that needs a bit more work to kind of re-release for the future Typhoon displays. So that unfortunately got cut out during my workup, and it meant that by the time I got to my public display authority for the public shows, I no longer put the gear down as part of my sequence, which was a bit of a shame, but things like that do happen, they do crop up, and you have to be dynamic and deal with those.
And do you ever talk to like any other nations' display pilots to get any advice from them?
Yes, we're very lucky. We get invited to the European Airshow Conference every year, which is in Athens this year, which will be a great few days, I'm sure, with next year's pilot. So I'll go out there with him, and we will go out and talk to all the other display teams from across Europe, particularly the solo jet demonstration teams, because they're kind of very similar to what we do, and kind of discover, first of all, the priority is safety, kind of understanding where they've learnt lessons, where we've learnt lessons, how to make what we do and the activity we do as safe as possible. But also, yeah, like I said, get ideas and think about, oh, okay, you do that, that's cool. The only caveat is, like I said, we're very much doing a Typhoon specific display, and you'll get more advice and support from previous display pilots who have flown that aircraft and understand it than an F-18 dude who has got a really cool display and does some really cool high alpha stuff, but I just can't transition that into the Typhoon world because our flying controls are very different in terms of how the aircraft responds to G and alpha, etc. So get lots of inspiration from other display teams for sure, and really good to catch up with them and have a shared safe communal area to talk about stuff. But in terms of actually building the sequence, it's kind of built on Typhoon experience rather than broader, if that makes sense.
So once you've got it down, when do you start your workup and how long does it take?
Yeah, so the workup generally starts at the end of January, and it starts with the synthetic phase. So again, notwithstanding the freestyle sims that you've had just messing around, hopefully by the end of January you've got a sequence that you quite like and you want to present to the supervisors, and then you go through the sim phase, which for us at the moment is 6 assessed simulator sorties, each one with a Typhoon display supervisor. And again, the idea then is just to kind of confirm your sequence, and by the end of that 6th sim, you need to have your sequence kind of formally approved by the chain of command to say, yep, we've got a sequence that works, it's safe, it's manageable, it's exciting, we're good to progress. At the end of the sim phase, you'll then go into the live phase, which starts with 2 flights at 5,000 feet, which any pilot can do aerobatics above 5,000 feet. So there's nothing particularly display related about it, but it's just a chance for you to get a bit used to the G, because again, the G loading on the display is significantly higher than normal, and also just make sure the sequence actually flows. So all that good work you've done in the sim translates nicely to the aircraft, that the energy management is what you expect, and from one maneuver to the next, for example. So for me, I did that up over the northeastern coast at the end of January, sort of. I think for me it was kind of early February time, and then we get into the actual displays in the Coningsby overhead, which for us is 1,500 feet as a min safe distance. That's the hard deck that I won't go below at that point. For us, it's 10 displays at 1,500 feet to prove that you are safe and able to accurately fly aerobatics to that height before you then get approved to come down to 500 feet. You'll do 2 displays at 500 feet, and then you'll get cleared to minimums, which again for us is a minimum of 6 displays, and that's 100 feet for anything kind of flat, so less than 20 degree angular bank, 300 feet if you're up to 90 degree angular bank, so any kind of knife edge passes or any kind of max rate turns and maneuvers, and then anything fully aerobatic, so inverted flight or looping maneuvers, down to 500 feet, which is still plenty low enough when you're coming out with some of these maneuvers. Trust me, it's quite an eye-opening picture when you see it for the first time. So based on those kind of minimum heights, we'll do a minimum of 6, normally a bit more, and that takes us through to May. So all in all, you're talking about 3 or 4 months of quite intensive training to get you from the sim phase, where you just speculating over ideas, to fully fledged, qualified public display authority ready to go.
And you have 3 displays as well, don't you? Is that not quite difficult to remember them all?
Yeah, it can be for sure. So again, that comes back to the sequence design. It's really a good idea to think about your rolling and your flat displays, which are the 2 alternate displays courtesy of the British weather. Thinking about those in terms of, okay, I want to make the ground track pretty much identical to my full display, so I might be doing different maneuvers, but I'm not going to have a cognitive error where I'm turning in the wrong direction or ending up in a different area. It also allows you to seamlessly transition from one to the other. I didn't have to do it very often in my year, I think only once or twice, but there might be a few occasions where you would start with the full display and realise the cloud base is a bit too close for comfort, or the clouds moved in and the weather's visibility's dropped or whatever. At that point there, you make the decision to degrade to a rolling display mid-display, so it needs to be something that you can transition from one to the next quite quickly. So yeah, based on that kind of design and that philosophy, you can kind of come up with a sequence that is reasonably similar. The rolling doesn't have you going up more than sort of 40-50 nose up, so it's limited in terms of its vertical extent, and the flat is really limited. We're talking potentially like a 1,200 foot cloud base at that point, which is really uncomfortable. So for a flat display, that needs to be no more than sort of 10 degrees nose up. So lots of aileron rolls and lots of aggressive max rate turns and maneuvers, which ironically is more G than a full display, because you're keeping the jet low to the ground and you're not allowing it to go up the hill, so it normally is a bit more aggressive on the G, but it needs to be in respect to that cloud base. So yeah, in answer to your question, yeah, it can get quite confusing, hence the reason you repeat these lot and lot during the workup. You'll do lots of fulls, lots of rolling, lots of flats until you know them off by heart, and I still know them off by heart now, clearly, and I'm sure in 10 years time I could still knock it out if I need to, because it's ingrained into me as a person in terms of what those maneuvers and what those sequences look like.
So talk us through PDA. Were the nerves there?
Yeah, it's a funny one. You're told it's not any different from any other display, and you just get up there and do your thing, mate, and there's a load of senior officers here, they're just going to watch you, but don't worry about them. But you can't help but worry, and it's a natural thing. So I remember coming into work and, you know, you're told, it's just another display, don't worry about it. But about 7 or 8 people that morning will say, oh, good luck today, mate, and all this. And you start to think, well, there's something unnatural. And the other thing is, depending on the day that you do it and what's going on at Coningsby, a lot of the other squadrons will all be grounded during that window. So there'll be no flying that morning, for example, for you to go and do your thing. So the entire base kind of stops and watches a lot of the time and sees what's going on. So there's quite a lot of pressure, and you're there obviously jumping into the jet. And for me this year, I had a few issues with the aircraft. I had to jump to the spare and had a few issues airborne. So it was quite a tumultuous day. And absolutely the pressure is there, even though you're trying your best all morning to tell yourself that it's just another display, there should be nothing different about it. You naturally do get a little bit nervous, for sure. Yeah, it is, yeah, for sure.
So how many are actually on the team?
We have a large footprint across the squadron, but actually most of those aren't permanent on the Typhoon display team because we use the resource from the rest of the squadron. And if you remember, 29 Squadron is very much a operational conversion unit first, so it trains the guys and girls how to fly and fight Typhoon, and that instructional stuff I talked about earlier is the priority for the squadron, as well as the combined qualified weapons instructor course, which basically means that we train effectively the UK's equivalent of the Top Gun here as well, so get the best pilots, the best equipment, the best parts to produce the best products and get them out to the front line. The net result of all of that means that the squadron is pulling in one direction, and then display is kind of maybe taking some of that resource away, which can be challenging at times. So we're kind of left to kind of take guys and girls out of their primary duties away with us for the weekends, and take that wider pool of Air Force and specifically Typhoon abilities away with us for the display weekends to make what we do happen. To that end, in terms of staff, we only have 4 kind of permanent staff for the year, and the rest of those people that you'll see in all the pictures and our PR teams and our engineers are pulled out of the squadron pool at various points to help us deliver what we do. So we have me as the Typhoon display pilot, we have a Typhoon display manager, we have the engineering manager, and then the public relations manager. Those are the kind of the 4 key roles, and they'll all have teams working for them, but those teams are very much built up of engineers from across the station that don't just do display, they're doing other jobs as well.
Before we get onto your first role, obviously you display here. Did you feel like you're at an air show already because of all the spotters out there?
Yeah, it's a really strange one, and you're told again very much to kind of ignore that side of it and just concentrate on doing the safest possible display for you and the supervisors to get better at. And you know, when you start, you're not the best, and you do need to learn. So it's a natural part of kind of learning that you start off pretty average and you slowly get better. So you try and put it all out of your head, but undoubtedly, yes, there are spotters at the fence line, and a lot of the stuff we do is videoed, so it's kind of all out there for people to see quite early on. I'd just definitely say the 5000s, you go up and away, it's out the way, but the first time you do a 1500 foot display over Coningsby, that's the first time you do feel like, oh, this is like being a display pilot now, because even though you're at height and you're told not to necessarily take too much notice of the ground and the line features that we're using beneath us because we're at an artificially high height, you can't get away from the fact that you are doing aerobatics a lot lower than you're normally used to doing it, and you're doing it over a live airfield where people are kind of stop what they're doing and watch what's going on. So you can't escape from that, and it is a fact of what we do. But yeah, it's you do try and keep it out of your head as much as possible and just concentrate on delivering the display.